One of the things to bring awareness to is that the past changes based on the lens through which it is viewed in the present. In other words, the present changes the past. And we can certainly see that in crude terms by looking at soil that's millions of years old. We're looking at a history of movement, volcanic movement, compression, a history of gravity. But we're looking at those history through words that 10,000 years ago didn't exist. There wasn't a word, gravity, that existed 10,000 years ago. But we're looking at this through the lens of gravity. Now, 10,000 years in the future, we will look at the same hundreds of millions of year-old soil, and there will be another word. There will be another language. There will also be other words, other ideas, because all an idea is a pattern of energy, right? We can look at this and we can say this is a diagonal line. And what we're saying is that there's a pattern of soil, and soil is just a word for dense stuff below us. And we can say that it's lower on the left side, another word, and higher on the right side. And we could say it's a darker color than the color above and below it. And so we observe a pattern of energy, and we could call it a strata, a layer of some kind. But if you didn't have the word layer, and if you didn't have the word diagonal, you don't have the idea of a layer, and you don't have the idea of a diagonal, right? And so the idea of strata, a pattern that exists on a diagonal layer, doesn't make any sense. It doesn't occur to us. So ideas and words are one and the same. If we don't invent the word, we can't have an idea that uses the word. If we don't have an idea, we don't invent the word, right? So it might start like there's something moving like this. Well, what are we going to call this? Well, we might as well call it a diagonal. We could call it a piagonal, a y-agonal, but we just make up a symbol, a word for that pattern. But these words shape things because we could call this, because if you look closely, this pattern of energy here gets slowly thinner. By up here, it kind of peters out, right? There's almost no size. So it's getting bigger and bigger as it goes down. We could call it a V, or we could call it a layer. We could call it a sideways V. We could invent language that would define these things as sideways Vs. We could call it a SV. And that would be just as intelligible as a strata or as a diagonal fissure or line. So there's all these different ways for language to illustrate the pattern. And depending on the language that we use, the pattern appears differently, right? Because if I call it a SV for a sideways V, I'm going to be emphasizing the widening at the bottom. That's what you're going to look for. Sideways V, first of all, you look which side, this side, this side. And you'd have to say that for it to be a V, it has to start on the right, right? It has to start on the right and mark that way because it's wider here, and that's the only thing that would make it a V. A V has to be wider at one side and narrower at the other side. So if we call this a sideways V, or SV, we look for the direction of the widening. On the other hand, if we call it a strata, and we just say these are many striations, you might not notice anything other than many striations, many layers, and just say, yeah, there's many lines there. A strata, a line of some kind, there's many lines, right? But you don't necessarily start counting where the V is, which you have to do if you're looking at it through the lens of a sideways V. And so the language we use in the present determines what we see in the past, right? If we break the world into two and divide the two into masculine and feminine, the way some languages do, you have to look at a table and decide if it's feminine or masculine in that language. And if you say that the table is feminine, you're going to see and pay attention to parts of the table that are different than if you look at the table and call it masculine, right? So you might look at the feminine table and you might say it is a container that things rest upon. And you can say, yes, warriors come home and rest upon the comforting container of their family, or their spouse. Or you might say it's horizontal, right? Let's say vertical is masculine and horizontal is feminine. So you'd focus then on the surface here. But if you say the table is masculine, which every language is free to emphasize different bits in the languages that divide that up, you would say that, the table has 4 spikes and only 1 flat, right? If you say the table is feminine, it's to provide a containment, right? You could say that, it's a feminine activity, not male or female, right? Because that's different. Men and women both have a male and female side. So if you say that this is a feminine table because it facilitates a feminine activity, a circle of family gathering, right? So the paradigms, the language of the present creates much of the reality that we see in the past, right? Now, with language, we can bridge the gap. I could teach you what a sideways V is, and you could teach me what a strata is. And we could both agree that there was a V and a strata in that location because we can see both patterns within the object. And most objects are like that. We could see the seating of a family around the table, and we could see the 4 vertical lines. We could see the violation of gravity, right? Because the masculine within both men and women, the masculine, tends to be more pointed, whereas the feminine tends to be more spherical, right? And so the masculine, in some sense, as an idea, violates the round by diverging, by rebellion, right? Adolescence is a more masculine state in both men and women because it's one of separation rather than integration. An adolescent is criticizing, is going through antipathy. They're criticizing and separating from the circle of the family to find their individual, their pointed identity, distinct. They're cutting the circle into pieces, right? So, with that said, what does the past look like today? Like, as I look back with the patterns the paradigms, the language of today at age 47, July 2022. What does the past, or what do the pieces of the past that I'm choosing to look at, what do they look like today? So let's see where the bottom line is. Let's start down in here. So one of the things that's common in the formation of identity and the layers of identity is that the earliest ages are less distinct because language isn't present to break them up. If we remember language through regression, through hypnosis, through psychedelic experiences, we're re-entering the biological domain with a consciousness that has language, and we're looking at the experience of a consciousness that did not have language. So we're reframing the experience through a different frame, through a pattern, a grid called language. Now, down in this domain, I experience a light, an innocence, a presence, a light, an innocence, as well as a clenching feeling, right, of fear. A light, a presence, and a clenching energy that today I would call fear. Back then it had no language. It didn't have light, it didn't have clenching. But that's the language of today. Now, slightly older, in maybe the 3 and 4 year range, I'm seeing the reaching and nothing, right? I feel like I reach out to grab something solid emotionally, and all I get are clothing, right? Empty vessels. So there's an image of reaching for something, of trying to hold onto something, and a vibration like this. And I can grab clothes, but I cannot find presence. I cannot find a solid connection. Slightly older, I see that I can have a connection with shame. I can have a connection with my father through shame. And there's a moment in childhood where I become aware of myself through my father's eyes. And I look at what I'm doing through his eyes. And what I'm doing is I'm maybe 4 or 5 years old. My second sibling, my next sibling of the 5 children, I'm the oldest. So the second sibling, 2 years younger than me, Juliana, she's 2 years old. And I'm sitting outside in the gravel on a blanket, and she's sitting outside the blanket. And I'm making her laugh and making her cry. Maybe I'm tickling her or making funny faces to make her laugh. And then I'm poking at her to make her cry. And then I'm tickling and making her laugh, and I'm poking at her to make her cry. And so she's moving up and down through tears and laughter. And I would say that already there's a certain curiosity. So there's a strata in that of curiosity. Like I'm curious about that range and that reaction. And I'm slightly analytical about it. Like there's a detachment about that. This and this. It's kind of like I'm turning on and off a light switch to kind of see what happens. And when I look at myself through my father's eyes, the first thing I feel is ashamed, because I feel like there's something wrong with making my sister cry. So on one part of that continuum, she's laughing, but on the other side, she's crying. And I feel in that moment that there's something wrong and I want to look down. I also want to stop doing it. Right? I want to stop doing that. Kind of, I would call it, in psychological language, learning regulation. One of the most important life skills that anyone can have is to explore continuums of energy and learn to regulate it, right? Because, if you're dribbling a basketball and shooting a hoop, you're learning to regulate all kinds of energy patterns in such a way that you can predict the ball going into the hoop. But you can only do that if you're familiar with the terrain, right? If you're trying to pass someone in the freeway and you've never used an accelerator before, and you don't know how much torque gets applied per inch of acceleration at that speed. For example, an electric car has more torque at a lower speed than a higher speed. Like if your gas pedal or your electric pedal at 70 miles per hour, if you press it 1 inch, it doesn't lurch forward from 70 to 80 miles an hour. But if you go from 0 miles per hour to 20 miles an hour and press it 1 inch, the car lurches forward. So you have that's a learned regulation. You learn that the pedal tapers off as you get higher and higher towards its maximum speed. The torque isn't the same per unit of measurement. And so that's a regulation. That's something you have to learn with that car. Otherwise, you cannot instinctively pass someone at 5 miles an hour or at 70 miles an hour and know what to expect, right? And obviously, it's easier to learn those regulation skills if it's continuous, right? If every centimeter of the pedal creates X amount of torque, then going from one to the next, it would be very easy to learn that. As it is, it's often surprising. Like I thought it would pass a little faster, but no, I'm going 70 miles an hour already, and so it's minimal torque as it goes to 80 miles an hour. It's almost nothing, right? It slowly works up to 80 rather than the instant lurch forward relative to the current speed. So these are, so regulation and attunement and regulation at a very mechanical level is one of the most fundamental things to learn mentally, emotionally, and physically in order to navigate the environment. And so I would say that in the absence of a secure and stable attachment with my parents, that I'm learning regulation with my sister in this experience. And I would also say that there's an energetic dimension, or there's a dimension that transcends language that can be present for anyone that is able and willing to access it, right? So my language around this incident creates a certain amount of shame and also creates a certain amount of judgment. My language judges my language, would be another way of saying that, because I have language for this thing, and then I have other language that judges that language. But my present experience of this is of light, is of excitement, is of connection of some kind, that I'm exploring connection with my sister through the channels available within the family pattern to connect, right? Because a family, a child is born into a template of energy and finds a role within that template, a function. And that role of seeing what happens when this is done and that is done, that's within the family system. And so I can connect with my sister through that pattern of energy that I inherit, right, just by the download of being in the presence of grown-ups that are doing that with themselves and one another. Now, when I look up and look at my father and look at him, what I would say is I see a worried expression, I see fascination, I see shame, and I see acceptance. And as I go to stop doing that with my sister, because there's the thought that that's not, that that's bad, I realize that my father in some way feels bonded to me through that pattern. That the thing that some part of me feels ashamed of is the same thing that my father feels ashamed of in himself. And that he identifies with me in that pattern. We are the ones who did this. We are the ones who do that. My father looks at me and sees himself in that pattern. And so there's the retraction, like I don't want to do anything bad. And then there's the empathy going out to Dad, that Dad feels lonely in his shame. So if I keep doing this, he will feel less alone and he will bond to me and I'll have a connection with Dad. That is the deepest conscious connection that is available to me. So Dad has a lot of shame, Michael. He has a lot of shame. And he feels ashamed of some of his behavior. And he feels ashamed of shame. He feels ashamed of his shame. He's spending a lot of time looking out through the lens of shame. And it's a strong feeling for him. So he's living in a lot of shame. He's living in a paradigm of shame. It's a strong feeling. And he's spending a lot of time looking out of that window. And he's seeing me as a reflection of himself in that shame. And so if I allow him to see himself in me, in the activity that he shames in himself, I will have a stronger psychological bond with him than I will, for example, just playing innocently, right? Because he's not as in touch with his own innocence as he is in touch with his shame. So if I want an identity of belonging to Dad, I course correct and I continue to play that role of making my sister laugh and making her cry. And I begin to take on an identity through the language of my father, which would be called the tormentor, right? So my father sees some of his own behavior and sees it as tormenting, punishing, petulance, and he feels ashamed of that. So if I do some of that same behavior, he will look at me with the feelings of judgment that he has of himself, and he'll also see me and he'll recognize me. I will be his son, rather than some strange object that he cannot connect with. Because in the domain of innocence, where he cannot see and spend time with himself, if I'm in that terrain, I am not his son. I am someone he is ashamed of. No. I am someone he feels ashamed to be around, right? So by taking on that and embodying what he considers shameful, he is less secretive with me than he would be if I'm in the terrain he feels ashamed to present himself to. Because shame is about hiding from something that one considers better, truer, good. You know, they ate of the fruit of knowledge and they hid from the Lord. The Lord is what's projected to be positive. The Lord is what's projected to be the good part. And I have violated the good part, and so I'm now ashamed to be seen by the good as somehow defective, right? Because if whatever the law is, like let's drive 55 miles an hour, right? That's the law. And that's the good law, because there have been several children who have died because people have driven 90 miles an hour, right? So several people were driving 90 miles an hour, several children are dead. And so the parents of the dead children passed the law to say no faster than 55. And that boundary is to protect other children from that grief, from that loss. And so when I violate that law, and somebody who lost a child sees me driving 75 miles an hour, 25 miles past, 50% past the point at which I was supposed to be protecting children. That was what the boundary was for. They look at me as if you don't care about my dead child. And if I believe that, because I think, you know what? It would be hard for me to stop at 75 miles an hour if a kid ran out from the side. It would be hard. And so they're right. I care more about my adrenaline or getting to where I want to go than I do about the 1 in 1,000 chance of hitting a child. And the anger, the hurt in that parent that says, you don't know what it's like to lose a child. There's a part of me that agrees with them and says, yeah, you're right, I don't. And you're not protecting the next parent from that. And it's like, yeah, I'm not. I'm racing exuberantly to what I want to do, and I'm risking that child in the process. There's a part of them that hates, that disowns, that says you're not part of this community. If that's what you choose, if you choose adrenaline over our children, you don't belong here. I have no empathy for you because you have no empathy for me. You're taking my deepest pain and you're driving right over it. You're not respecting, you're not seeing, you're not understanding, you're not empathizing, and you're not attuning with my deepest pain. And my deepest pain is too big for me to deal with. I have to turn away from my deepest pain because I don't know how to deal with it in an emotionally illiterate culture. And you're putting me into my deepest pain that I don't know how to deal with. And so I don't know how to deal with you either, other than to turn you into a villain, to say, you are the reason that I'm in this unspeakable state. It's people like you that give me this grief I don't know how to deal with. And they have a point, right? And so, yeah, it is people like me, right? I'm not doing this because I want to have that impact. I'm not doing this because I want to kill children. But more children will be killed per million children if everyone drives 75 miles an hour than 50 miles an hour in areas where children are playing. Or in areas where children are driving in other cars, right? Because the faster you drive, the faster we drive in tight formation, the more likely that one person turning the wheel in a split second, meaning a third of a second. At 75 miles an hour, a third of a second can take you 5 feet off course into the other lane. At 20 miles an hour, a third of a second takes you a foot, right? It's not the same, right? And a foot you can recover from. 5 feet, not so much. So the faster we drive, the more we honor expediency and speed, and the less we honor emergency room visits and precluding them. And so I feel a sense of shame when I recognize and see myself through the eyes of another. Now, when I feel that I am unspeakable, right? When someone feels something unspeakable and they turn away from me, they feel something unspeakable and they turn away from me because they cannot process the energy that I bring up in them. Maybe they want to kill me. I want to shoot that motherfucker who's endangering our children. Why? Because I don't want to see another child die. I don't want to grieve by another helpless parent that I feel incompetent to be with. I don't want to do that again. I would give anything imaginable not to do that. And they're not even thinking about it. I want to kill them. I want to shoot the fuckers up. Get out a machine gun and mow down every one of these fast cars. Why? To protect myself from the helplessness I feel standing by a parent who has lost a child. Knowing the pain and knowing that my cult does not facilitate the amount of grief and bonding that that parent needs to heal. Knowing that that parent is going to go into a cycle of pain management, of addiction, of rage, that could explode their entire life, and no one in this cult has the competency to intervene and stop that tornado of intensity. In an emotionally and a psychologically illiterate cult, there's no remedy for that kind of pain other than addiction and numbness. And so I would kill the people who do that in cold blood, because it would feel better. I would feel more powerful than I would to stand helplessly by as a child, as a parent, spirals into loneliness, into grief, into pain that our cult has no remedy to respond to. And I recognize that someone would like to kill me, that someone would like me to disappear, that their hatred for what I have done or could do is such that they would do anything to avoid feeling that. And out of empathy, out of understanding, grasping that I am in unspeakable territory. Why? Because they judge themselves for wanting to kill me. Right? Why? Well, in part, it's a loop, right? I want to kill you because you might kill someone. You've got a 1 in 10,000 chance of killing someone at 75 miles an hour. So I want to kill you, which is 100% chance of killing you, right? If I kill you, that's a guaranteed death. I want to murder you so that you don't have a 1 in 10,000 chance of murdering somebody else. Right? So that's not a defensible position statistically. Like if we took every person on the planet that had a 1 in 10,000% chance of killing someone else, and we killed them all, we would kill most of the population, or a good chunk of it. And if anyone who has a 1 in 10,000 chance of killing someone else is killed, and they're killed because they had a 1 in 10,000 chance of killing someone else, then the person killing them is 10,000 times more guilty using the standard that was used to kill all the people that were killed, right? So if I say anyone who might kill someone, in a 1 in 10,000 chance should be killed, and I'm going to kill him, then there's not a 1 in 10,000 chance that you're going to kill someone. You've actually been killing multiple people that had a 1 in 10,000 chance of killing, right? Because it's not just one person that speeds, through areas children play at 75 miles an hour. You got to kill a lot of people before you get those people out of the system. So you maybe are one person who has actually killed 10,000 people, and you're beginning to make progress at that. But right at some point you start killing, right? Because all the parents and friends and lovers whose partner or father or mother you murder so that they might not murder other people, then some of those are in emotionally distraught states in an emotionally illiterate culture, and they kill other people while trying to recover from losing their father or their spouse or whatever and deal with their rage and helplessness. So it just doesn't add up. And so I'm ashamed at wanting to kill you because I understand at some level that the part of me that wants to kill you because you might kill someone else is more dangerous on the same grounds that I'm considering you dangerous. So it's unspeakable. I then feel ashamed of myself for my reaction to what I blame you for. Now, because I feel ashamed of myself, now I have created a wall. And this is how shame travels as a virus. When someone grasps the depth of emotion in the other person, because they lost a child, and here I am driving fast, and they've put up signs, slow down, and I'm driving fast. Oh, I get it. And they turn away, and we realize that we're now in unspeakable territory. They will not speak to us. Some part of them wants to kill us. They will not speak to themselves. They judge themselves for wanting to kill us, and they also feel tremendously helpless and enraged and just grief that they can't stop the cycle of violence in a reptilian environment. A reptilian environment is where there's so much trauma that everyone is self-centered. Because if there is scarcity and pain, everyone needs to look out for themselves to survive. And so self-centeredness correlates to trauma, helplessness, and scarcity. So, of course, children in a painful, traumatic environment are incredibly self-centered, as are adolescents, right? And so in that environment, you have people doing what's good for them at the expense of other people because they're self-centered rather than centered on empathy for other people. Right? And self-centeredness breeds self-centeredness. It's a virus. The parent that takes out a gun and shoots someone speeding on their street is doing it out of self-centeredness. They're not doing it for the other person. They're doing it because they can't bear to be with their feelings of rage and hurt and helplessness, and they can't bear to think that the other person is so self-centered that they don't even know what's going on. The other person is so self-centered that they're not even thinking about my kid or my feelings. They're thinking, how can I get a 2% extra hit of dopamine and adrenaline and look cool? And that's more important to them than my child. I can't bear to accept that reality. But if I shoot them, they're gonna think about me. Right? And I'm self-centered. I'm not thinking what it's like to be a teenager. I'm thinking what it's like to be a grieving parent, sleeping in a cold bed with another grieving parent who blames themselves and can't speak about it and blames me and can't speak about it. So I have no one. In an abuse cult, in a sociopathic cult, in an emotionally illiterate cult, in a traumatic cult, I have no one, least of all myself, present to honor the grief of my greatest pain. As I'm married to another emotionally incompetent human being who didn't learn how to do that any more than I did. And so the next few years, I would say, we're learning about that terrain. You see, if I'm too perfect, if I'm too innocent, if I'm too kind, my father feels ashamed that he cannot understand those feelings. and he cannot meet me there, and he cannot play with me there. But if I'm too cruel or too outside the line, his shame goes up, his rage goes up, and he can't be with me there either. So there's a strata at which I am bad enough in his terminology to be like him, but not so bad that he has to dissociate from me as he does from the worst shames in himself. And so I would say that learning to regulate in that bandwidth was one of my most formative patterns. And the first conscious pattern of my life was learning to navigate that strata of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. To first of all reference my father instead of myself, and find the amount of pain and guilt and the amount of shame and shameful behavior that got his attention but not his rage, that got his identification with me without hating me. And on the top side of this is where I would get hit. If I went too high, I got hit and knocked down traumatically. If I went too low, I stopped to exist because he was lost in his own shame, and in order to find him, I had to find shameful behavior that allowed him to see himself in me so that I could exist as a present part of his inner dialogue. In other words, he's down here shaming himself, looking at himself in shame, looking at his loneliness, looking at his pain, looking at his grief, looking at his helplessness, looking at his hopelessness. He's down here ruminating about that. And me innocently playing and engaging with the world is too far of a stretch for him to find me and connect with me. It's like that's way off there. Innocence is way off there. And pain and shame, way down here. I'm alone, I'm separate, right? But if I could come across his radar and do something bad that wasn't too bad, he could look up and say, I'm not so lonely. I'm not so alone. My son is like me. And he's not so bad. I can care for my son. I can accept him. I can see him. And I could be real for Dad if I would do bad enough things that he could identify with me, but not so bad that he could not bear to be with himself. And so that was the regulation, because beneath the despair, beneath the depression of my father, beneath the pain and loneliness of my father, lay hatred, lay rage, lay violence. And his passivity and his self-absorption and all of his silence could come out violently if a certain line was crossed. But there was a very thin layer Meaning I had a strata that I could exist in my father's world that was very, very, very thin. Too high, and I'm beaten into shame, into trauma, into loneliness, into grief, into terror. Just below that, I don't exist at all. I am patronized. Go out and enjoy your life. That's nice. That's fine. I'm busy with pain. I'm busy with loneliness. I'm busy with shame. I'm busy going over and over and over and over the past again in my mind and feeling unworthy and feeling inadequate and feeling unloved and feeling alone. And that's nice. Go out and play and be innocent, but that doesn't hold any of my attention. And I wanted to exist for my father. I wanted to matter. And so I had to find this narrow area that changed, right? Because the more pain he was in, the thinner that strata was. It's like when he was in a good mood, I had much more room to play in. Things were going well. But if he was busy hating himself, I had barely a millimeter, right? There was just a tiny, tiny wedge of space where I could exist and not take the full rage and hatred he had at himself directed at me. In the knowing that he wanted to hurt me as much as possible, that he wanted me to know his pain. He wanted me to know that he was hurting me and knew how much he was hurting me and wanted to have that effect. You see, and this was devastating to a 5-year-old. Because a 5-year-old cannot look at the giants around them and say, my dad is incompetent. My dad is a narcissist. My dad is lost in a loop that makes him incapable to be a decent parent. My father is incapable of loving in this state. And it has absolutely nothing to do with me. And there's nothing I can do about it. And I'm just stuck, lonely as hell, trying to matter a little bit so that I can gain some template of significance with 2 narcissistic parents whose overwhelming drive is to avoid all emotional contact with themselves or anyone else who might elicit it, and who view me as their greatest threat. My parents didn't want to feel. And the innocence of a dependent child elicits more feeling in a parent than anyone else. I was the crime. I was the criminal that crossed the taboo, the line, into making them feel, into reminding them of their incompetence, of their helplessness. And that part of them, that didn't want to feel that, wanted to kill me, wanted to punch me up, wanted to give that virus, that pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being to me, so that they were not alone carrying the curse of the family system. They wanted to give me that feeling. You see, and a 5-year-old cannot look at that objectively. A 5-year-old identifies with the family and its system and blames itself for the faults of the world. So if my father hit me, if my father looked at me with rage and hate, and I recognized that he wanted to destroy me, I did not take that as you're a fucked up dad who can't manage their feelings in a psychopathic, psychologically illiterate culture that didn't teach you how to love or attune or bond with yourself or anyone else. I took that as I'm bad. I'm fundamentally flawed. Something wrong with me. I am unlovable. I'm sorry, it's my fault. That's how every 5-year-old takes that kind of hate from a parent. And it's how I took that kind of hate. And that feeling that it's my fault, the feeling that it's wrong, the shock, feeling that I could die, this was the beginning of complex PTSD. Because there was no defense. There was nowhere to go. Whatever they gave me, I told myself I deserved. What I deserved was shock and terror and loneliness that I couldn't hold in my body. So I began to dissociate. So we have a dissociative band in the 5 to 6 range. In the 4 to 6 range, we have a dissociative band that just tunes out. We also have a tremendous band of loneliness. I'm all alone in that place, and that's where my parents want me to be. They want me to feel as hurt and small and lonely as they are. Tremendous fear, tremendous stress, tremendous pressure, tremendous loneliness, tremendous confusion of this energy reverberating through my body. And that doesn't lead anywhere. I'm a failure. It's all my fault. I'm unlovable. I deserve to be punished. I'm numb. I'm overwhelmed. I can't deal with this. There's no way out for that energy. So that energy stays present in my body, ricocheting off a tomb of a self that was lost in shock. That energy bounces around in there with nowhere out. There's nowhere for that to go. Because to admit as a 5-year-old, I am completely dependent upon the whims of reptilian sociopaths who hate themselves and don't know what they're doing is liberating to an adult to some extent, to at least recognize the truth. But what are you going to do at 5 years old in the wilderness? You know, this was part of the ecology, you see, because my parents thought it was a good idea to be out in the forest, to be out in the middle of nowhere. Because my parents knew there was something wrong with them. And they blamed it on the cult, on the culture. This is the sick part of the materialist, crappy American culture that doesn't know this and doesn't know. We got to get away from other people. Where do we go? Well, into the forest. Miles away, and we have to have alternative. We have to have alternative education, alternative lifestyle, away from that sick conglomerate of cult norms. Right? It wasn't hard to build the house in the forest. What seemed impossible was to evict the cult memes that were so toxic in their own eyes, from their own bodies, from their own psyche, from their own pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. The effect on me was I am alone. I've got two giants who hate me if I move out of line and can kill me and want to. Or I can be all alone in the terror of that and not exist. I have to find this narrow band. Well, at some point in here, there's a strata of just numbing out. It's just too much to feel. So I didn't. Now I'm numb and develop learning disabilities, right? You can't learn and be numb at the same time. You have to be responsive and engage with reality. I was trying to numb reality. On top of that strata came to filling the void of connection with self, connection with feeling. On top of that identity came, I would say, the manipulator. The manipulator. So, whereas the smaller part was trying to find a place where it could exist and be real, the manipulator is in a dissociative state. It's already past trauma. And so the manipulator is trying to just explore the world from a very detached, abstract thing. What happens if I do that? There's very little feeling, right? And there's also less authenticity. And so I would say that as the manipulator, there were several kind of offshoots of it. The first is I mapped out the territory of what was and wasn't acceptable to my parents more calculatingly and with less authenticity. I found, for example, that my mother liked the idea that boys were naughty, but not too naughty. She didn't want to be scared. What she liked is the idea that boys were naughty, but that she was smarter than naughty boys. And so she could see what they were trying to do and outwit them. And this would make her feel like the world was the way it should be. But she wasn't very bright. And so in order to play this game, for example, I would have to come up with something naughty and harmless. And then I would have to do it very, 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 very blatantly because she wasn't very attentive. She was largely dissociative, right, from her feelings and stuff. Yeah, so I'd have to kind of, like if I was going, for example, sneaking a cookie would be a terrific success in this bandwidth. Naughty boys, good. Sneaking something, good. A cookie, no harm sneaking a cookie, right? And then she's dim, so let me pretend to be stealing a cookie. Like, let's wait until she's looking this way and then move towards the cookie jar, looking furtively about me, right? So that I pretend that I don't want to be caught, when in fact, that's the only way I exist, right? I don't exist outside of these stereotypical bandwidths of projection. And so to exist, I have to fall into a very simple plot line that is manageable for my mother. Naughty boy being the easiest one for her to make sense of. And then blatant naughty boy being necessary, or she would be too dissociative to notice, right? Because the point is to get to exist. So I have to fall within a loading dock where she's open to accepting information because she has a preconception of that's what boys are. So she's got several loading docks where stimuli can come in. And the easiest one was, as I said, the naughty boy. And so I would try to deliver information that made me exist, that would get a reaction other than being hit or something. And then she could say, oh, you're a naughty boy. I see you. And then the game would be to try and do it again, right? Without crossing a line that would lead to violence, because my mother would hit me as well. But with enough stupidity to exist, right? We're dealing with a dim-witted person with poor eyesight who is off in her own fantasy world. Now, this was the development of this identity. Now, one part of me was bored and frustrated. It's like, I'm an actor, give me a good role. Every manipulator, has the ability to play a role. Give me a good role. Okay, how about this, right? You probably haven't heard of this before, but why don't you be a naughty boy? You have to come 10 feet away from me because I have poor eyesight. And in broad daylight, sneak up and do this, and then I'll act surprised. It's like, that's it? That we're just going to do that for years? That's your great role. So there's one part that is bored. There's another part that's angry, hurt, and hostile, right? So we got the bored part, got the anger and hostile part. Because I'm being punished. My mother enjoys punishing me for being a naughty boy. But she doesn't have the decency to admit that the only reason I'm being a naughty boy is because she's too incompetent as a parent to come up with any other meaningful way to relate, right? Because she's off in her own fantasy world, whereas Michael, my father, is, losing himself in his shame and his past reminiscences. Sherilyn is off in her own fantasy world completely, right? Nobody exists, right? Michael doesn't exist, she doesn't exist, nobody exists. It's just this fantasy world. So, if in order to exist and not be hit, I have to play this role, it seems like if someone's going to be punished, it ought to be her, because the only reason I'm playing the role is to make her comfortable. that the world is what she fantasizes the world to be like, because she doesn't actually want to deal with the world. She wants to deal with a fantasy. She's more comfortable being in a dissociative fantasy and not connecting with herself or anyone else than she is with reality. And this is my limited selection of plots available for the fantasy, right? So there's an anger and a hurt that I'm being set up to play a role in which I'm playing the bad guy because that's the role that's open. And it's not the role that's real. I'm not the bad guy. At that stage in my development, I'm the only innocent person in the system, along with my sister, who starts to play her own roles of, she has a wider range of stuff. She can be cute because that's within the domain. Now, the other role I can be with my mother is the sensuous lover, right? Because within her fantasy world, she can fantasize about the romantic prince, right? But I don't feel comfortable being my mother's lover. So and part of that is the whole insanity around sex and sexual energy and sexual tension that is perpetuated by the cult, but is exaggerated by, I would call, the Waldorf, Rudolf Steiner, New Age kind of idea around sexuality. Just as an aside, dirt is supposedly a curse word. And so something is dirty is supposedly to say something bad about it. Never mind the fact that all life on this planet is resting on the foundation of dirt, literally, and in so many different ways. You take away dirt and you take away all plants. You take away all plants and you take away all animals. Right? You take away dirt and life on this planet collapses. You take away fucking and life on this planet collapses. You take away shit and life on this planet collapses. So there is something quite strange about a cult that depends on fucking, shit, and dirt for its very existence on a planet that depends on life, well, on dirt, fucking, and shit. Shit, by the way, is the fertilizer for the dirt. How you can get away with such blatant data, cursing your foundation of existence, is a stunning act of schizophrenia, stupidity, insanity, self-hatred. That's dirty. And what is the dirtiest thing? Life. And how do you get life? Procreation. Fucking, right? So sex was dirty. It was fascinating. It was interesting. It had all this weird energy around it. You could get tremendous attention. Like that was another thing. Being naughty and alluding to sex indirectly that pretended to be innocent. These were two ways to captivate attention. My mother could enjoy it with her fantasy, and my father could enjoy that terrain as well, right? We produce grown-ups who are sexually repressed, sexually suppressed, sexually divided by the schizophrenia of the cult around sex. And so you trigger that energy, and so you can exist. And so that was another way that we could exist, was to talk about sex as an innocent and let the parents be patronizing and look at each other, right? That would be very entertaining to my parents if we would allude to sex or sensuality in some way as in the role of an innocent, right? But that it didn't gel as well as being bad, being a naughty boy, in part because I had already taken on the shame of my father that said that he's bad and I'm like him, so I'm bad, and naughty boys are bad. So there's a lot more to work with. There's more integrity in that strata. Less confusion and less taboo, because they were very happy to explain why I was bad. You're bad for this, you're bad for that, you're bad for this. But sex, how do you make sense of it when nobody will talk about it, other than to hit you for alluding to it, and to say that it's dirty and leave you to figure out how dirt is supposedly bad when all life depends on it, right? I mean, if you said it in more direct language, that is the source of all life, cut it out. Don't talk about the source of all life at this table. Well, the insanity begins, I thought you said life was a good thing. Don't sass your parents. You know, it's more laughable. Right? That's a dirty word. Okay, so it's a dirty word. And dirt is good, right? You say you're organic gardeners? Don't you like dirt? Don't try to do that. So you've got nothing to work with when you're dealing with that level of schizophrenia and, frankly, stupidity, right? How, you know, what do you do with people who are afraid of their own existence and the source of all life, and who think that dirt and fertilizer and procreation is bad? Life is bad, right? I'm bad, and I was made by life, so life must be bad, I guess is the logic. But it's the logic of intergenerational shame and unlovability. It's not the logic of life or science or intelligence or sanity. It's the logic of shame and intergenerational trauma. So the manipulation thing getting boring sometimes, but also anger and hostility. I'm playing this goddamn fucked up game because you're too incompetent and immature to play a real role. You don't even want to be real. You don't want to talk about anything real. You don't want to exist, and you don't want me to exist. And I resent it. I resent the lies. You want a little performance, because that was the other thing. You know, a little hippie boy. That would also fit into my mother's fantasy. You'd be a little running around with long hair and natural clothing, naked in the forest. Oh, it's so wonderful. That's the way it should be, right? So that role was available. You know, no reality there, no reality there, no reality there. So part of me began to get angry, right? So that boredom and anger began to create real kind of frustration and sociopathic behavior. By the time I was like 8 or 9, I enjoyed tormenting my younger brothers and making them feel helpless and small, the way my parents made me feel. And it was just more out of, just oozing out of me by that time. And shortly after that came the feeling of disgust at their stupidity and hypocrisy. It's like, you are so dumb you don't know that you're dumb. You're so hypocritical you can't even admit you're a hypocrite. I mean, look at you. Like, I'd look at Michael and Sherilyn, and Michael would try to get some point across. Sherilyn would try to tune him out. He'd be annoyed. He'd say, "Why aren't you listening to me?" She'd say, "Oh, I'm listening. He'd say, "Well, it's okay. So what did I say? You said some things. You said some things. Yes, some things. Name one." "Oh, Gorbachev. Did you mention Gorbachev?" "No, I didn't mention Gorbachev." "Well, I'm busy with this. Nobody listens to me. This, so Michael was annoyed that his chosen wife was committed to tuning him out. I was annoyed that she was committed to tuning me out and all reality. This went on endless. I mean, it just became more of a joke, so more cynicism, more disgust, because the trouble with, traumatic and frankly dumb parents is they're often too dumb to realize they're dumb. That's one problem. And so you don't get the satisfaction of them grasping how irritating it is to have that rammed down your throat. So realizing my mom's too dumb to grasp that she's dumb. So I'm going to have to live with a dumb woman pretending that she's not dumb because she can't deal with even that as an aspect of reality. Right? And my father's going to punish all of us for all of the smallness he feels about being made to be invisible and insignificant by a woman who can't and won't connect with reality. Anyone, including herself. And he won't be honest about any of his feelings because that would be too vulnerable, right? He'll just punish and hurt people for the feelings he's feeling, but not acknowledge them. And so, Michael around this time got involved with his revenge for all of this, being made to feel small and a very needy, small, hurt boy needing mothering from a mother, from a wife who was incapable of connecting with reality, let alone being mature. And she was probably the age of 17 sometimes and 4 other times. Well, he wants comfort and mothering from his wife because he didn't get it from his mother, and she's incapable of providing it, right? So that just goes round and round, and frustration and depression. Oh, right. Like another round, right? I mean, after so many years, you're surprised you made another attempt to connect with someone who's absolutely committed to avoiding reality, and amazingly, she tuned you out again, right? So, that's maddening. What are you doing, Dad? And then he decides to torment everyone around him by making elaborate holes. So he'll dig a hole over here where someone is dumb and stupid and to be laughed at. This is the stupid hole. And then he'll set out on an adventure, taking a circuitous route to maintain the element of surprise, and at the last minute dump someone in the hole. So he'll say, "Well, what have you been doing today?" That might be the opening salvo. "Oh, so you've been this." So he would reframe everything, and the humiliation would start, and he would lead along, reframing, and, "Oh, I guess you're a very stupid person." "I guess so, Dad. We fell for your little plot again. We actually thought you were interested in our day when you just wanted to make us feel stupid. Oh, well, how dumb are we, right? We thought dads were supposed to be pleasant or interested, but that would have required a little maturity. So Dad would do his little thing, and then his only satisfaction to his chronic frustration, rage, impotence, depression, irritation, his only would be to drop someone else into the feelings that he felt all the time. Small, helpless, stupid, surprised, right? So he would do that, and young me, he started doing this at maybe age 5. Young me would enjoy doing one of two things. Either we'd both gang up on Mom, and you can see that I'm still in that boat to some extent. We'd both gang up on Mom like, what a fucked up moron. And Dad would say, well, she's your mother, right? And of course I wouldn't say, well, you picked her, right? So, your mother, this was the time of transfer, because of course the obvious question is, if she's so dumb and so unsatisfying and so incompetent as a mother and as a partner, why did you pick her to have 5 children with? 5, right? You didn't stop at 1. You didn't grasp the pattern by a year, 2 years, 3 years. No. You just kept expecting someone committed to dissociation to actually be interested in you. And then blaming yourself and your unlovability that she isn't, right? That's what you did. I mean, pretty smart, right? So, but this was taboo, right? So my mother, that was assigned to me. So all the stupidity that comes from this moment forth is my fault, right? Because if I had chosen a different mother rather than Michael choosing a different wife, or choosing not to have children, or choosing to have a divorce, right? If I had chosen to be born by a different mother, now this gets into some of the, metaphysical quagmire, right? Because if you look deeply at most spiritual teachings, and my father owned a metaphysical bookstore, so he knew all about spiritual teachings, you will find again and again texts saying that the child chooses the parent chooses the child, that these are life contracts, right? So of course, if I pre-existence had just chosen another mother, then he wouldn't have had to have endured, as my father, the stupidity of his wife, right? So you get the logic. It holds together if you string the right things together. And so it was all my fault. Your mother, did you hear what your mother? No, what did she do today, Dad? Well, she did this and this and this. And then your mother, right, just remind me that it's my fault, did this and this, right? So that would be one thing. We're superior to Mom, and isn't she dumb? Oh, she's terribly dumb, Dad. Well, now that we all feel superior to her, I feel better. And we probably shouldn't be too hard on her. After all, she's very dumb. So, she probably needs every bit of help that she can get. That was one role. And when I was young, Dad would go off on his journeys to prove that the world was stupid. His wife was stupid, all this stuff. His children were stupid. But he was intelligent. So that went on for a while. Oh, you're awfully smart. And that could work also genuinely, meaning at 5-year-old, I couldn't find a hole in his argument. Just like, wow, Dad, you came up with that. You're the smartest person in the whole world. Amazing. I didn't know that. Now I do, right? Now, as I'm, moving into, 10, 11, I'm angry about this because the path is well worn, starts off with a seemingly innocent question, takes veer turns, usually humiliate someone a bit here, and it always ends up in the same place. It doesn't matter, we could start over here, come at it over here, we could start over here and come straight down, right? But the finale is predictable, 100%. Dad is smart and everyone else is stupid. And if you don't agree with that assessment, then you're really stupid, right? And you're probably the most stupid one. So those are the two forks. Are you just stupid, or are you so stupid that you don't realize that you're stupid and Dad's smarter than you? So those are the pick. Take your pick on that one. You're right, Dad. We're all very stupid. Well, then he would be kind, right? Well, you can't help it. We can't all be smart like me. I mean, obviously, but, you can't help it that you're stupid. But at least, see, you're one of the smart ones because you understand that you're stupid and that everyone else is stupid. Do you know what, son? Most people don't realize this. They don't get it. They think that they're smart and that I don't know what I'm doing. But can you imagine how dumb they have to be like that? But you're one of the smart ones. We know that I'm smarter than everyone else. Yes, Dad, I know it. It's obvious, right? We know that. So, those were the two junctures. And, as a younger kid, I have the smartest dad on the planet. Amazing. As an older child, not so much. Dad's looking petulant. Emotionally, he's about 6 years old. He's not getting his own way and he's punishing everyone. And he's blaming everyone in the most complicated associations, right? For his chronic failure in some area or other, right? It's harder to believe, isn't it, right? So you mean to say if Mom hadn't kidnapped you and handcuffed you and forced you to have sex and then kept you under lock and key for the last 15 years, you'd be a free man? With, in all your brilliant intelligence, you couldn't escape this idiot, that, in your own words, right? Is not too hard to poke some holes in this fantasy, right? Plus, I don't enjoy being one of the stupid ones while having to watch so much stupidity, right? And so I start developing another pattern. So Dad would ask, the same question up here, and he'd have his kind of plan. And I'd say, okay, it looks like this is going to go like that. But I need to answer his question like this in order for him to get to here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to answer the question like this. Then I'm going to answer the next one like that. And then I'm going to answer this one over here so that he falls into his own pit or has to admit that he's trying to fall us in the pit, because that's part of what allows this sociopathic aggression to be morally superior, because he's coming out of this being the long-suffering martyr, right, in this whole little game. He's coming out being the long-suffering martyr. Why do I have to be with these stupid people? If I do it this way, then he either has to really force and show his aggression, right? Because he's better than other people, right? He's better than people who are angry and he's not angry. He's just sad that he has to be with such stupid people, right? So there's tremendous rage and hatred and hostility underneath that veneer. And the question is, if he shows how enraged he is, then he doesn't get to feel superior to everyone else in the family. We all feel enraged too, right? Which he's enjoying and amusing himself with. So I wouldn't fall in the pit because I'd see where he was heading, because it wasn't that hard to figure out, right, after so many years. Or I would be on the other side of the pit, that he'd have to kind of catch himself and do this and that. Or I would just cut it off. I would say, Dad, where do you want this to go? What do you mean, where do I want this to go? What are you looking for? What do you want to be the outcome of this interaction? Well, I'm just wanting to know what's going on with my own family. Why? You don't seem to take any interest in your family. Why do you want to know? What's going to happen if you know what's going on with your family? You want to offer some help? You want to give some money? You want to do anything useful? No, I didn't think so. So stop bothering me until you come up with an agenda we can share. Like, if you actually want to be helpful, here's how you do it, Dad. You say, Dane, I'd like to be helpful. How can I do it? And I'll give you a list. But you don't want to be helpful, do you, Dad? No, you just want to make everyone feel like shit so that you don't feel as lonely feeling like shit yourself. Isn't that right, Dad? So this was kind of the last layer of identity with Dad. Because Dad didn't have an answer for that. Because he wasn't willing to say, I hate all of you because I'm dependent on your mother for parenting and she's a terrible parent. I don't know what to do. I feel stuck. I feel small. And I hate everyone for depending on me when I'd like to be parented. And I'm going to punish everyone as much as I possibly can for my revenge. So he didn't feel comfortable saying that, which was, as clear as I could see, the truth, the most relevant pattern. And he also didn't want to look stupid himself, and he also didn't want to be helpful, right? So there was no move that he could make within his goal of being passively, righteously hostile within this pattern. And so he would try a few moves, like, one of these days, Dane, you're going to be a parent like me, and you're going to see. What am I going to see, Dad? Well, you're going to see. Nothing in particular? Well, you will see, right? Well, you couldn't argue with that, right? I'm sure I will see something, right? So that, he could do that move, or, you're going to regret not thanking me before it's too late. That was another move. For what, Dad? Tormenting us incessantly? Being a 6-year-old child? Beating us? Taking us off into the wilderness to escape the vicious culture? Only so that you could humiliate us? Dragging me around in a sack? What am I going to be so upset that I didn't get to thank you for? Right? Having a metaphysical bookstore so you could blackmail us with all this nonsense? What? Right? So, after that was kind of the end. So that was kind of the last strata. And I remember, I was the only sibling that could babysit my younger siblings, because my parents had trained my siblings to be dysfunctional in a variety of different ways it's kind of a lot to handle 5 people doing all that at the same time. And so most babysitters would refuse to babysit after 1 or 2 times of being just discombobulated by the family system. And so my parents desperately wanted me to babysit so that they could go and do whatever they wanted to do. And so I had to figure out the family system at age 13, 14, 15, and 16 in order to, manage my 4 younger siblings. and also to make some money so that I wouldn't be dependent on the begging protocol. My parents loved people to grovel, particularly my father, because that was a prime torment thing. You need something. Let's see how long I can string you along before you either get hostile at my hostility, and then, oh, I'm not giving you any money because look at your hostility, right? So that would be a great victory for Michael, because then he could say, so now that you need something, you want some money for me, right? And then he would go past, all the accusations of his crimes, right? So you want $5 from the inadequate father, from the person who's too lazy to do this, from the person you can't talk to. That's who you want money from. You want money from all that, right? So what he's looking for is to retract all of the reality. It's like, yes, that's what I want. The dumb, fucked up dad who can't do anything right but does have $5. That would be nice, yeah. Well, a dumb, fucked up person like me couldn't possibly, do this. That's just, can't do that, right? So he's looking to a retraction of all that so that we can go insane, right? So that's kind of the deal. Like, will you take back everything you've ever felt about me so that I can pretend that I'm a perfect parent? And then if you will turn me into a perfect parent, then sure, a perfect parent would give you $5, so I'll go along. So that's kind of a cheap thing, for $5, all of your years of cruelty are all retracted and pretended that they never existed, whatever. So that's kind of the first thing. And then it's like, well, $5 is a lot of money. Oh, yes, tons of money, Dad. It's like, and then there's various things like, so he'll ask for some pretty incredulous, irritating things. Now, if you get irritated, oh, well, if you're irritated, I wouldn't want to waste your time. So maybe we should just have a pause, a timeout, until after the thing happens that you need the $5 for, right? That's, of course, very irritating. No, we don't want a timeout until after the event, right? Let's just get this over. So what is it, and then, so if there's not enough contriteness in all of this, to justify, him putting his hand in his pocket and, giving $5, then we would have, polite contriteness while we're stuffing all our feelings and being uncomfortable. That could be interesting for him to enjoy, right? So that was a possibility, but that just became so disgusting, right? To have to deny the snippets of truth that had actually been said, right? Because most of the truth in this whole family system has never been said by a single child to a single parent, right? Most of it, they don't want to hear, they don't ask, nobody tells. Let's not tell the truth to mom, it would be upset her, right? And it would, of course. So, a few snippets of truth have come out, right? And they all have to be retracted. Well, that's just too disgusting, right? So then I have to have some money of my own. And so babysitting kind of becomes an option. But, I don't want to go through the bullshit that most babysitters are dealing with the family system. So I have to understand the code and break it down. And it turns out that both of my parents reward every child with massive amounts of attention and what they want if they will be dysfunctional, and ignores and tunes them out, part of what I was talking about earlier, in the lower strata of when I became a naughty boy, if they are real and pleasant. And they even get angry if people are too peaceful, right? And so I realized that each of my siblings was just providing a service to my parents of being dysfunctional in a way that would allow my parents to ignore their own feelings, because that was the rule. Thou shalt not feel, thou shalt not make thy parents feel. That was the underlying structure and bottom line. And so I realized that if I just behaved completely different and rewarded my siblings for being authentic and happy and ignored them or punished them for doing their various acting out to satisfy my parents, that they would do that within 30 minutes of my parents leaving the house, but then they'd revert to the roles they had been programmed for within 5 minutes of my parents' return. And I could watch my parents come home to a perfectly happy, comfortable house, and it would upset them that things were so peaceful. Well, where's Lucanus? Why is it so quiet in here? You know, they would start sending the cues that would let oh yes, mom and dad are back. They need us to distract them from their feelings so that they'll give us attention and reward and start the battle again. And I sat my father down and I explained all this to him, you know, why they were so happy and peaceful when I was babysitting and why they never were when he or my mother was at home. He just sat there blankly. He was very uncomfortable with that. He didn't want to talk to me after that, right? Because, you know, it was too risky to reveal, you know, the patterns that were actually going on. And so that was kind of their dissociation from me. And my mother dissociated from me when she used to hit me at some point I got bigger than her, you know, maybe 12, but she kept hitting me until 14. And at 14, I said, look, Mom, you're not stopping hitting me from being asked to stop hitting me, right? I don't want you to hit me. You hit me, right? I could, of course, easily punch you out. I could hit you. I could take advantage of my superior size and presence and skill to hit you as much as I wanted to. I said, but I'm not going to. What I'm going to do is every time you hit me, let's say you slap me across the face with the back of your hand, you're 30% less body weight than me. And so I could just slap you across your face at my normal strength, which you're trying to hurt me. But what I'll do is I'll just give you an echo, right? So you hit me with, you know, let's say 20 pounds of force or 15 pounds of force, and, you know, maybe, you know, swing about that speed. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to calculate what that was like for your body, and I'll pretend that I'm your weight. And so I'll just hit you back at your intensity, not my intensity, because that could hurt you. And so if you would like to be hit by me, all you have to do is hit me. And if you don't want to be hit by me, then, well, just don't hit me. It's very simple, right? Well, naturally, abusers do not give up their victims easily, and so next time my mother thought she would feel better by hitting me, she did, and I hit her back. Well, then she whines, right? Michael, your son, not her child, right? Because this is the whole game of shifting responsibility as much as possible to somebody else, how to be a victim while being a giant and parent, right? Michael, your son just hit me. Of course, out of the blue, like no context or anything. It's just like, how could this happen? You've got to stop hitting your mother. Well, your wife has got to stop hitting me. Michael, I'm not going to stand for this. We have to call the police, right? So they call the police. And there's this long conversation with a Canadian police woman who's saying, violence is not a good thing. And I said, here. You notice that, parents? You know, violence, not a good thing. No, she says, you need to hear violence. Oh, I thought if violence isn't a good thing, it would be good for parents to stop beating their children. That's a good thing? No, everyone has to stop the violence. Oh, I see. Did you catch the fact that I have never initiated violence? Never. Did you catch that, right? Yes, but you shouldn't. Oh, you mean it's fine? Do you want me to call you next time my mother hits you? Are you going to do anything? Arrest her, perhaps, right? No, you're not, are you? So it's okay for giants to hit their children as long as they'll put up with it. But it's not okay to hit back. I see. Well, just so you're clear, I will never hit my mother again. Not once. I never have, and I never will if she doesn't hit me again. Is everyone clear about that? Right? And the police kept going on saying violence was bad. But she would direct it at me, you know, and I thought we've just escalated the insanity to an institutional level, right? The person starting the violence with all the legal authority and options and money and power doesn't get the attention. The scapegoat does, right? The one in the reactive posture. Well, my mother didn't hit me again, so I didn't hit her again, right? So that was the end of violence, right? The only way to stop being preyed upon systematically by a sociopathic reptile in the guise of a parent was to hit back, was to argue with the police. The only way to stop being psychologically tormented was to drop my father into his own pit a few times. So there was a truce. You don't tell us the truth that will upset our feelings, and we'll pretend that you're not our son. At that point, the anger was stronger than the loneliness. But of course, it's incredibly lonely to be used systematically by both parents. It's incredibly lonely to have one's two primary giants be emotionally unavailable except for shame and humiliation since birth. It's tremendously shaming to understand that these giants that are loving you want to hurt me badly. And that my well-being, my sanity, is to be sacrificed to manage their comfort. Where is the value? Where is the dignity? Where is the love in that? It is tremendously lonely to grasp these things. It's tremendously painful. It breeds a lot of cynicism, which is one of the striations. Bitterness, cynicism, disgust. And that's a lot, right? This is what my body is carrying today. Because at this point, I dissociated, right? I disengaged with my parents, and one of the mental mechanisms in the way of that was to call them by their names rather than mom and dad. And here's how I looked at it at 14, 15 when I was looking at it. I thought, what if I met my parents at school and had never been raised by them? Most people don't seem to have that much of a problem with Michael or Sherilyn. People praise them to me. Your dad's really smart. Michael's very smart. Your mom's very beautiful, right? So people don't seem to be all that worked up about my parents, as long as they weren't raised by them. In fact, if I met them at age 15 at the school or street or whatever, I wouldn't say, God, what wretched people they are. So I thought, the problem is not that they are unusually wretched in our cult or culture. They're pretty normal. The problem is I have depended on these giants for survival, for security, for love and belonging, and for self-esteem since I was born. And they have abused that dependent relationship chronically, narcissistically, to such a point that it is excruciatingly painful. And when I look at them as a mom or a dad, they are profoundly inadequate. As a stranger, as a Michael and Sherilyn, they're normal. So I said, I need to start looking at them, not as this horrific mom and this horrible dad, but just as people. I need to see them as human beings in a fucked up cult that raises fucked up cult members that behave exactly like Michael and Sherilyn with their children. It's just what they do to varying degrees in different ways, is pass on these intergenerational viruses. And so I began calling them Michael and Sherilyn, which upset them. I'm not Michael, I'm your dad. Well, try behaving like one, right? You want to be a dad? Be a dad. But you're not fathering. You're not leading. You're not teaching. You're not inspiring. And it makes me too upset to think of what a dad that I would like looks like and then look at you, either of you. And so rather than get upset and remind myself of the enormous gulf between what I'd like for a father and what I'd like for a mother and who you are and who you have been, I feel much happier reminding myself that there are plenty of Michaels and Sherilyns wandering around with as many blind spots, as much stupidity, as much self-hatred, as much cruelty as you. They're all over the place. They're raised by this cult as replicas of the cult. It's not personal. And you're not particularly bad Michaels or Sherilyns. You're average, right? You've got a little bit more insanity because you think you're all metaphysical and blah, 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 and you add all these, spiritual terms to your shame-based protocols. So it's a little more confusing, right? How you're unconditionally loving me while you're shaming me or this and that. That's more confusing, admittedly. Or how lucky we are to have all these words ascribed to the family systems. Before, they just said that's a fucked up family. But not this family. This is a progressive fucked up family. This is an alternative fucked up family, right? So it's a little more confusing on that level, right? And then it's a little more frustrating that we're supposed to be praising and admiring you for giving your shame in a passive solar home, right? Because, there are some people being shamed and given PTSD in gas-guzzling, non-passive solar homes, not alternative.